They say the House of Windsor never breaks first.
The heir waits. The king decides.
That's the unwritten contract that has held this family together for a century. But on one night, in one room, the man who broke the silence was not the king.
It was his son.
And the words William chose in that single moment made the announcement inevitable, made it heartbreaking, and left Camilla standing at the far end of the table, watching the future she had spent a lifetime building disappear before she could even speak. This is the story of how the heir forced the king's hand. And it is not the story the palace wanted to tell.
Because for weeks, the public saw a queen in motion. Engagements kept. Smiles held.
The machinery of royal life running exactly as it always had. What they didn't see was the other story. The one unfolding behind closed doors, in sealed folders, in a quiet auction room across the channel, and in the silence of a family that had stopped pretending.
Let's start at the end.
Because the end is where everyone was looking. King Charles stood in the Grand Hall, the room reserved for the moments that matter, and read words no one in that building genuinely believed he would ever say. Queen Camilla would step back from all royal duties.
Relinquish her title. Effective immediately.
Pending a full institutional review. That is not the language of a health scare. That is the language of lawyers working through the night. The language an institution uses when it's trying to protect itself from something it cannot spin. The veteran correspondents in that hall, who have covered every major royal moment for decades, admitted they had prepared no reaction. None of them believed it would happen. The palace had kept this so tightly sealed that even the people whose entire profession is reading the palace's signals were caught flat-footed. But here's the question everyone asked in the hours that followed.
Why now?
A decision like this does not arrive out of nowhere. It is dragged to the surface by something. And in this case, the something began not in London, not in the palace, but in Geneva. And the person who made sure that discovery could not be buried was not the king.
Rewind about a month.
Look at Camilla the way the people closest to her did. Because in her final public appearances, something was off.
Not stress. Not strain. Something subtler.
A smile maintained a little too precisely.
A posture a little too exact.
The behavior of someone conducting a second, private conversation beneath the public one. One member of her household staff, speaking later without attribution, said simply that she knew. That Camilla had known for some time. William, meanwhile, was carrying his own silence. He doesn't externalize conflict. That's his discipline, learned early, maintained through the hardest years of his life. But those who observed him closely noticed a particular stillness. The kind that those who know him recognize as the outer surface of something far less still underneath. He was loyal to his father. He was loyal to his mother's memory. And in this situation, those two loyalties did not contradict each other. But the alignment between them was going to cost him something he did not yet know how to name. Catherine moved through those days with the unhurried precision that has always defined her. She understood that in moments of institutional gravity, the wrong gesture carries as much weight as the wrong word. And princess and began asking questions no one else was asking yet.
Not in meetings. Not with announcements.
She simply started looking more carefully at the things everyone else had agreed to accept at face value. Because she had spent enough years inside this institution to know that the things most worth examining are precisely the ones everyone has quietly agreed not to examine. And Charles, in private, was none of what his public appearances suggested. Letters drafted in the early hours of the morning, found later, showed a man trying to write his way toward a clarity he had not reached. The crossings out were more revealing than the sentences that survived them. A husband trying to reconcile what he loved with what he was required to do. And finding, in the space between them, a distance no amount of careful language could bridge. None of them yet understood that the trigger for everything had not begun inside the palace at all. It had begun in a quiet auction room in Geneva. With a piece of jewelry that should never have left British soil. Here's how it surfaced. A specialist working for a private auction house flagged an item in an upcoming sale. A sapphire brooch of unusual quality. Provenance listed with deliberate vagueness as a private European collection. But the specialist noticed something the listing hadn't emphasized. A small engraving on the reverse of the clasp.
Precise. Personal. 2 letters and a year. D. 1981. Diana's personal marking. The item was cross-referenced against the Royal Collection Trust Registry. The meticulous record of every significant piece held in trust for the monarchy. And according to that record, the brooch was logged. Accounted for. Secure.
It had not been transferred. It had not been loaned. It had not, under any authorized procedure, left British soil. And yet there it sat in a Geneva auction catalogue. Available to any buyer with sufficient funds and sufficiently few questions. The authentication took less than 48 hours. The findings were unambiguous. The brooch was genuine. The engraving was genuine. And the discrepancy between where the record said it was and where it actually was could not be explained as a clerical error. It was something else entirely. The trail of documentation that followed, shipping manifests, coded invoice references, a chain of intermediaries whose involvement suggested prior arrangement rather than coincidence, led step by careful step toward a single point of origin.
Ray Mill House.
Camilla's private estate in Wiltshire. Princess and received the preliminary findings in a briefing she had requested herself. Those present in the room when she read the document described her reaction in almost identical terms. She went completely still. Not the stillness of shock. Something more controlled. The stillness of a person who has just received confirmation of something she had not allowed herself to fully believe until the evidence made believing unavoidable. She asked one question before the briefing ended. Who else has seen this? But the bro was only the beginning. Because what the palace's internal audit uncovered next was far more difficult to explain away. 2 additional pieces. Both originating from Diana's personal collection. Both listed in the registry as securely held and fully accounted for. Both unaccounted for. Their documented locations did not correspond to their actual locations. The transfer records contained the same category of irregularity. Altered entries. Unverifiable authorizations. Intermediary references that led, under scrutiny, precisely nowhere. This was no longer an isolated incident requiring a quiet institutional response. It was a pattern. And patterns, in institutions built upon unimpeachable trust, carry consequences that isolated incidents do not. And that is when the family gathered. The Maple Room at Clarence House. A room that had witnessed state rehearsals and private briefings, conversations between people who understood that what was said within those walls would never be repeated outside them. It was not a room designed for confrontation. Which perhaps made it the most appropriate setting for one. They gathered late in the evening, after the staff had been quietly asked to withdraw. King Charles sat at the head of the table, the posture of a man who has already made his peace with the fact that this evening will not end well. Princess Anne sat to his right. Composed. Precise. Offering nothing that could be read as either sympathy or judgment. William and Catherine sat to his left. Close enough to suggest solidarity without performing it. At the far end of the table sat Camilla. She had made one visible change. The pearls she wore to almost every private engagement had been replaced by a simple gold chain. A small alteration. No one in the room failed to notice it. Princess Anne opened a folder marked confidential and placed it on the table without ceremony. Photographs. Shipping documents. Handwritten transfer notes. Valuation records bearing a set of initials that appeared with uncomfortable consistency across multiple entries. She did not present these items dramatically. She simply made them available. With the quiet authority of someone who understands that evidence does not require performance to carry weight. Camilla looked at the documents for a long time before speaking. When she did, her voice was controlled. Not cold. Deliberate. The way voices become when their owner is managing something considerable beneath the surface. She did not deny the brooch. She disputed the interpretation. These were not my orders, she said. She did not say whose orders they were. The distinction, offered without elaboration, sat in the room's silence like an unanswered question wearing the shape of a defense. And then William spoke. This is the moment the title of this story points toward. And it deserves the weight it gets. Because William did not raise his voice. Those present later noted that this was what made it devastating. He said simply that silence at this stage, with this evidence in this institution, would cause more damage than any scandal. He was not delivering a threat. He was stating a fact that everyone at that table already understood, and that no one had yet been willing to say aloud. That was the moment the room changed. Because it was not the king who named the truth. It was the heir. And in a family where the heir is expected to wait, to defer, to let the crown decide, William had just done the one thing the institution does not prepare anyone for. He had forced the issue. He had made it clear, without ultimatum, without anger, that there was no version of this story where the family could keep the secret and survive it. The choice had been narrowed to one. And everyone at that table knew it. Charles asked one question during the entire meeting. Is there any other explanation? The silence that followed lasted long enough to become its own answer. Catherine spoke last. Quietly. Briefly. About inherited objects. About the weight of the stories they carry. About what is lost, not just institutionally but permanently, when those stories are separated from the objects meant to carry them forward. She did not direct these words at anyone in particular. She did not need to. No formal decision was announced inside that room.
No decree was issued.
No verdict was spoken aloud. But by the time the meeting ended, everyone present understood that a decision had already been made.
Not in words.
In the quality of the silence that had answered the king's only question. And here is where the story takes its coldest turn. The personal reckoning was over by midnight. What began next was different.
Colder. More formal.
Far more irreversible. The Privy Council was convened before dawn.
No public announcement. No press notice.
The cars arrived quietly. The attendees entered through a side entrance. Inside, the language remained clinical throughout. Deliberately, carefully clinical. Because the people in that room understood that the moment institutional language becomes emotional, the institution itself becomes vulnerable. And vulnerability, in this context, was precisely what they had been convened to prevent. The Royal Jewel Registry audit had been ordered the previous evening. Its findings arrived in the early hours, carried in a sealed document by a senior advisor who had been awake through the night. Charles read the findings alone. He asked for the room to be cleared before he opened the document.
He read it once. Set it down. Read it again.
And those waiting outside later described a silence from within that lasted considerably longer than they had anticipated. The formal decree was prepared with the scrupulous courtesy the monarchy reserves for its most consequential decisions. Camilla would be asked politely, formally, with all appropriate dignity, to relinquish her title and withdraw from royal duties pending the completion of a full investigation. The language would be careful. The implications would not require elaboration. Charles was presented with the decree for his signature. He held the pen for a moment before using it. The aide who witnessed the signing later recalled only one detail with any certainty. The king did not look angry. He looked, the aide said, like a man who had always known, somewhere beneath everything, that this day would eventually arrive.
Not the specific shape of it.
Not the particular form it would take. But the fact of it. The inevitability of a moment when the institution would require something from him that he could not refuse, regardless of the personal cost of giving it. The papers were signed before morning. But the visible, undeniable, public consequences were only just beginning. Because the palace does not announce its adjustments through drama. It simply proceeds. Quietly. Efficiently. The palace does not mourn visibly. It reorganizes. And so, by the time most of the world had finished reading the morning's news, the reorganization had already begun. Camilla's official diary was quietly cleared. Events confirmed weeks in advance removed without explanation. Statements went out, brief and identically worded. Her Majesty would not be in attendance. No reason was offered. None was required. The official website was updated overnight. A title adjusted. A biography revised. A page restructured. Small changes that, taken individually, might have passed unremarked. Taken together, they formed a portrait of a retreat conducted with exquisite institutional courtesy. Her personal office at Clarence House underwent its own quiet transformation. Staff reassigned. Files transferred. Correspondence redirected. Letters already drafted and sealed under her title were recalled and reissued under revised official headings. The correction was small. The signal it carried was not. The crown jeweler received a formal instruction regarding the Queen Mary crown. Its next scheduled public display, planned for months, confirmed in the program, referenced in advanced press materials, was indefinitely postponed. No explanation accompanied the instruction. The crown jeweler acknowledged receipt and filed the notification without comment. And then William and Catherine arrived at Clarence House that afternoon. They made no statement. They acknowledged no cameras. Their presence communicated, with more precision than words could have managed, exactly where the family stood. They stayed for just under 2 hours. They left the way they had arrived.
Composed. Deliberate. Silent.
Through all of it, Ray Mill House offered nothing.
No statement. No photograph.
No visible movement behind its gates. The silence from Camilla's private residence was so complete, so unbroken, that it became, in the absence of anything else, its own kind of story. Journalists stationed nearby reported nothing to report. Which, in the particular grammar of royal coverage, meant everything. But before the announcement, before the decree, before the world learned any of this, there was one final meeting that had not yet taken place. The one between the king and the woman he had spent a lifetime trying to protect. And what happened in that room, reported by those who later spoke of it, is the part of this story that makes everything else harder to watch. Charles went to Ray Mill House himself. No motorcade.
No announcement. No official reason given. He went alone, the way a man goes when he has something to say that cannot be delegated. Those who observed his arrival described the same thing. He did not move like a king arriving to deliver a verdict. He moved like a husband walking toward the end of something. Camilla received him in the room where they had shared so many private moments. She was composed. She had known, the reports suggest, for longer than anyone realized. And what followed was not an argument. It was not a confrontation. It was, by every account, quieter than that. He told her what the evidence had shown. He told her what the institution required. And he told her, in words that those present said carried the weight of a man who had been carrying this for weeks, that he would have done anything to avoid this moment. That there might have been another path, a gentler path, had the discovery come earlier. Had the trail led somewhere less direct. Had the institution been offered something other than what the evidence had ultimately required it to confront. There might have been, he said, if we had known sooner. The conditional tense carried everything the sentence did not say aloud. She showed him the coronation photograph without explanation. It sat on a small table nearby. The two of them captured at a moment of shared public joy, her crown tilted at a slight angle, both of them smiling with the unguarded quality that photographs sometimes catch and people rarely plan. She held it for a moment, then set it down between them. She did not ask him to look at it. She did not say anything about it. She simply placed it where it could be seen by both of them, and left it there. He left before the light faded. The protection officer later recalled that the king did not speak during the entire drive back to London. He looked, the officer said, not at the passing countryside, but somewhere beyond it. At something with no visible location and no available words. That evening, a single handwritten note arrived at the palace from Ray Mill House. It contained no grievance. No accusation. No appeal. Only 3 words, written in Camilla's hand. I understand completely. What happened inside that room remained private. But what happened next in the streets, in the studios, on the screens of millions, could not have been more public. The announcement broke across the world the way only certain stories do. Not gradually. All at once. Everywhere. Simultaneously. Within minutes of Charles stepping away from the lectern, the story had left the grand hall entirely and become something that belonged, in the particular way that royal stories always eventually do, to everyone. Broadcasting networks interrupted scheduled programming. Studio panels assembled at speed. Former royal correspondents, constitutional historians, biographers, legal experts, former palace advisors, all speaking with the urgent precision of people who understand they are being asked to explain something that has not, in its specific form, happened before. The language in the studios was careful. The implications beneath that language were not. International reaction arrived in waves. European outlets led with the Geneva connection. The auction house. The sapphire brooch. The trail of documentation that had crossed borders before it crossed the threshold of the palace. French coverage framed it as a story of inheritance and its complications. German newspapers focused on the constitutional dimensions. American networks, less constrained by the particular reverence that proximity to the institution tends to produce, used language considerably less restrained. Dynasty. Crisis. And outside the palace gates, the public response took a form that no studio panel had anticipated. Flowers began appearing before the afternoon was over. Not in protest. Not in celebration. Something more complicated than either. Lilies, predominantly. White roses. And among them, handwritten notes whose contents were not made public, but whose presence communicated a grief that had found in this particular moment a renewed reason to surface. Portraits of Diana appeared, carried by individuals who had brought them without coordination, without organization, as though the announcement had activated something that had been waiting quietly for a reason to become visible again. One detail moved through the coverage faster than almost any other. Among the flowers placed at the gates, a small brooch had appeared. Clearly handmade. Sapphire blue. Shaped with an approximation of the original that suggested considerable care and deliberate intent. No one claimed it. No one removed it. It sat among the lilies through the afternoon and into the evening. Journalists photographed it. It circulated across every platform within the hour. The captions people attached to it varied. The emotion beneath those captions did not. Social media divided, as it always divides, into positions that were each more certain than the evidence warranted. One side argued the institution had protected itself with appropriate resolve. The other argued a woman had been publicly dismantled for institutional survival. Both arguments were made articulately. Neither was entirely wrong. And in the space between them, the conversation continued across studios,
across platforms, across the ordinary dinner tables of people who had not, until that morning, expected to find themselves with an opinion about the future of the British crown. But before the world had finished speaking, the royal family made one decision that no press release could replicate. They stepped outside. 3 days after the announcement, William and Catherine arrived at a children's hospital in London. No statement had been issued about their attendance. The engagement had been scheduled weeks in advance, long before any of what had occurred had become public knowledge. And they had simply decided, without announcement, without explanation, to honor it. That decision, unremarked upon in any official communication, was itself a statement more legible than anything a press office could have composed. Catherine wore grey. A fitted coat, understated in cut, precise in its understatement. On her wrist, a pearl bracelet that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth. Around her neck, nothing. The choice of what she did not wear occupied, in subsequent coverage, almost as much attention as what she did. Those who studied the visual language of royal appearances noted the absence immediately, with a careful phrasing of people who understand that observation and interpretation are not the same thing. Though in this case, the distance between them was very small. William walked slightly ahead as they entered. The shift in their usual positioning was subtle enough that many viewers watching footage replayed across the afternoon's coverage did not notice it immediately. Those who did notice it said very little publicly. They did not need to. The image communicated what words would have made smaller. A man moving forward deliberately, into a space that now required him in a different way than it had the week before. The future, the image said, is here. It has already begun. Inside, among the children and the staff and the ordinary human texture of a place defined by care rather than ceremony, something shifted in the coverage's emotional register. A girl, perhaps 7 years old, presented Catherine with a drawing she had made. A figure in a crown, outlined in crayon, colored with the particular confident inaccuracy of a child who draws what she feels rather than what she sees. Catherine received it with both hands. She looked at it for a moment, longer than the occasion required. The photograph taken in that instant, her expression unguarded, the drawing held carefully between her palms, moved across every platform within the hour. It did not require a single word of caption to convey what it carried. Charles made a solo appearance 2 days later at a Commonwealth engagement. He spoke briefly. He said nothing about Camilla. He said nothing about the announcement, the audit, the decree, or the events of the preceding week. His composure was, as it had always been in the moments that cost him most, absolute. But those watching closely noticed one thing only. He did not use the word we. Not once, across the entirety of his remarks. He spoke of the institution. Of its commitments. Of its relationship with the nations gathered under its history. He spoke entirely in the singular. And the absence of a shared pronoun, in a man whose public language had for years been constructed around partnership, carried a weight that no explicit acknowledgement could have matched. Princess and stood at a military ceremony that same afternoon, directly to Charles's right. Precisely where she has always stood in moments requiring the institution to present itself as unbroken. Her expression offered the cameras nothing readable. Her position offered them everything necessary. Ray Milhouse remained silent. No appearance. No statement. No photograph confirmed or denied. Only a single blurred image captured at a distance by a local resident. A figure in the early morning garden, indistinct, unverifiable, moving slowly among the hedges. It was shared widely. The question people attached to it, again and again, in language that varied and emotion that did not, was always the same. What is she thinking? And when the cameras finally fell away, and the corridors grew quiet again, what remained was not a verdict, but a question that no institution has ever fully answered. Weeks passed. The palace returned to its rhythms. Engagements fulfilled. Ceremonies attended. Statements issued. From the outside, and the outside was where most of the world remained, the monarchy appeared unchanged. What had changed was interior. And interior things, in institutions built upon the management of surfaces, rarely announce themselves. William and Charles were seen together publicly on several occasions in the weeks that followed. Formally correct in their interactions. Unified in their presentation. And yet those who had observed the relationship across many years and many difficult moments noted something that resisted precise description. A quality in the space between them that had not previously been there. Not hostility. Not distance, exactly. Something more like the particular weight that accumulates between two people who have stood together through something that required them both to pay a cost they had not fully discussed with each other. Because here is the part of this story that the headlines could not capture. William had forced the issue. He had spoken the truth that no one else would say. He had been right to. And he would carry the knowledge of that rightness, and everything that rightness had required, for the remainder of his life. That is the burden of being the one who names what everyone else is pretending not to see.
You are correct. And you are changed.
And the man who had to sign the decree, his father, now looks at his son and sees both the heir the institution needs and the reminder of the hardest decision he has ever made. Catherine moved through the aftermath the way she moves through everything.
Composed. Deliberate.
And privately carrying considerably more than she permits any public surface to reflect. Those close to her described a woman who was not diminished by what had occurred, but was not untouched by it either. She had watched the institution make a decision that protected itself at significant human cost. She had supported that decision. She understood, with a clarity that her position grants and her intelligence has always sharpened, that she too is held by this institution as much as she holds it. And that understanding, one imagines, does not simplify anything. Princess and remained, to all visible appearances, entirely herself. Perhaps because she had understood, long before this particular crisis arrived, that the crown does not accommodate sentiment as a structural feature. Perhaps because she had made her peace with that truth so thoroughly, and so long ago, that its latest expression required nothing new from her. She stood where she was needed.
She always has.
Camilla had not returned to public life. Those who had spoken with her in the weeks following described someone who was, by every account, privately dignified in the face of something that had cost her everything she had spent the latter portion of her life carefully, painstakingly building. She had been seen in her garden at Ray Mill House in the early mornings, walking unhurried. One account mentioned that she had taken up correspondence again. Long handwritten letters. The kind that take time and intention.
To whom they were addressed, no one said.
And Charles spent an evening in his private library. A letter lay on the desk before him.
Sealed.
Addressed in his own hand to his sons.
Not about the crown.
Those who later became aware of its existence suggested it was about the cost of wearing it. About the distance, permanent, structural, and non-negotiable, between the decision that is right and the decision that is kind. And what it means to be the person required, by history and by duty, to make that distinction again and again across the full length of a reign.
He sealed it. Set it aside.
And let the silence of the room settle around him. Because the crown endures, as it always has. Not because it is flawless. But because those who carry it choose, again and again, to place the institution above themselves. And whether that sacrifice is called duty or tragedy depends entirely on where you are standing when the verdict is delivered. But this time, the choice was not made by the king alone. It was made by a son who refused to let the family hide from the truth it had been carrying.
William forced the moment.
Charles signed the decree. And Camilla, at the far end of the table, in the gold chain instead of the pearls, understood before anyone else that the future she had built was already gone. The announcement was heartbreaking. But the real story, the one that will be told and retold, is the night the air broke the silence. Because that is the night the crown changed. And nothing, not the flowers, not the headlines, not the quiet garden at Ray Mill House, will ever put it back the way it was.